Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us here at Heroes in our Zoom webinar about expanding the ecosystem. We are very thrilled to have so many folks with us here today. Our panelists are moving over from the backstage into our live webinar. I'd like to just do a quick housekeeping before we jump in. First and foremost, if you are new to the Heroes community, welcome. We are really grateful to have you and eager to share with you how we've been expanding active bystandership in public safety. A couple of quick housekeeping. First and foremost, this session today is being recorded, and it's being recorded because we have many folks who wanted to learn but were not able to attend. And so those folks are going to get the on-demand recording after this. The second thing, folks, is that if you look down at the bottom, you will see a feature called chat. We would absolutely love it if you are able to join us in conversation via the chat feature. In addition, however, we also have a Q&A feature. And the Q&A feature, folks, allows you to submit questions that you have either for our content or for any of our panelists. And at any point in time, we'll be checking the Q&A, but we also will make sure that we spend a ton of time making sure that we introduce ourselves and keep Q&A at the very end. The last thing I wanted to share with folks as far as logistics is that even though those of you who are attending live, you're going to get that fortune of asking direct Q&A, you will also get a recording of today as well if you want to follow back up or if you want to share that with others. Okay. Well, with that, we're going to go ahead and get started. Our topic here today is specific to a collaboration between ABLE, Active Bystandership for Law Enforcement, and we have the lovely Cisse here who will introduce here in just a moment, as well as we've got several people here from some of the agencies where we've expanded across from ABLE, which is Active Bystandership for Law Enforcement, to HEROES, which is Active Bystandership for the rest of the public safety continuum, including jails, EMS, fire and rescue, and dispatch. We've got folks from Suffield, Connecticut who are joining us here today, as well as some folks from Colorado Sheriffs, and we've got some of our national instructors who's been live bridging this divide. I'd like to actually briefly hand the mic over to our ABLE representative today, Cisse, to briefly introduce herself. And Cisse, when you get a moment, if I could also have you just do a quick overview of ABLE, that would be greatly appreciative.
Yeah, of course. So, hi everyone. My name is Fatimata Cisse. I normally go by Cisse, and I am a senior program associate at the Center for Innovations in Community Safety, also known as KICS. Mainly, I manage the day-to-day operations of the ABLE project, as well as some of our cross collaborations. So, our work with Heroes. Mhm. So
Thank you.
a little bit about Able, and I don't know, Abigail, if you want me to touch a little bit on the history of Able, like where we started, or
Perhaps
I
just
can
a
just.
quick overview for right now, and then we'll get into the history as we proceed.
Mhm. So yeah, of course. So Able is a project that where we provide our active bystandership curriculum, so our peer intervention training curriculum to law enforcement agencies nationwide. At its core, we provide our active bystandership training with the goal of promoting and creating an organizational culture within agencies where officers feel empowered to intervene. So feel empowered to intervene as well as supported by the leadership at their organizations to prevent misconduct, reduce mistakes, and promote officer health and wellness. So I would say at its core, this is what ABLE does. And currently we have over 430 law enforcement agencies nationwide, as well as some provinces in Canada. Mhm.
Thank you so much, Cisse. I appreciate it. As no surprise for those of you who know Cisse, she is humbly skipped over the brief introduction of herself, so I'm going to fill in there because she's a wonderful human. She got right into talking about what she's passionate about, which is ABLE and active bystandership for law enforcement. Cece is the Senior Program Associate at the ABLE Project, which is within Georgetown University's Center for Innovations and Community Safety. She has a background in addressing the challenges in policing through evidence-based research. She oversees the training operations, and frankly, I don't think there's a single ABLE agency who wouldn't recognize her name or email address because of her ongoing collaboration with them. I'm also going to go ahead and introduce some of our other panelists, and then Cece and I are going to jump in to talk a bit more about the history and collaboration between ABLE and HEROES, and then we want to hear from our panelists today. So from Suffield, we are fortunate to have two representatives today. And when we get to them in our panel, I hope that they add more about who they are, or you'll just learn more as you hear from them. But first, we have Christopher Johnson. Chris is a paramedic, preceptor, EMS instructor with the Suffield Volunteer Ambulance Association. Chris brings vital on-the-ground medical rescue perspectives to active bystandership. He serves on clinical care task force as an advanced EMT program director. He's helped pioneer cross-disciplinary training in Suffield. And one of the things that I appreciate about Chris, we'll get to this here today, is that he really has that great balance between talking real about what it's like to work in EMS, but also wanting to move towards how do we elevate the profession. So excited to hear more from him and grateful that he can join us. We are also joined by Captain Robert Palmer from the Suffield Police Department. Thank you, Robert, for joining us. He he was right now in a captain role of the Suffield Police Department following a lengthy clearance state patrol. He's been instrumental in bridging the gap between law enforcement and other first responders. He helped me facilitate with CSA this training that we brought to Suffield and the cross collaboration there. I'm really excited to hear his thoughts about how this type of training elevates not only law enforcement, but how we work together as public safety. Lucky for me, I am also joined by two national instructors. I'm going to start by introducing Michael McIntosh because he's wearing two hats here today. We are fortunate to have him as both an ABLE and a HEROES national instructor, but he is also the division chief for Douglas County Sheriff's Office. And we're going to talk a little bit today about how we also expanded ABLE and HEROES with sheriff's offices in Colorado, and he's going to bring some unique perspective on that topic as well. And then last but certainly not least, Greg Hanna. I don't know that there is an ABLE agency who doesn't recognize Greg Hanna's face, if not his voice. He's probably been their #1 lead trainer since inception. I think I only beat Greg by coming an ABLE national instructor maybe a month or two before him, but he has far exceeded me on number of trainings provided nationwide. Greg is also, however, a retired leader in law enforcement, and he is also a HEROES national instructor. And we're really thrilled because we'll have time to hear directly from Greg. But one of the things that I like about Greg is he kind of brings that trifecta, right? He is a retired law enforcement officer, FBI, NA. But at HEROES, when we're expanding across the criminal justice curriculum, his father was a former detention officer and his mother is a paramedic. And so he really brings the whole family perspective, and we really appreciate that as well. So for those of you who are not familiar, again, I want to welcome some people who came in just a bit late. We are recording today's session because we know there are people who registered who are unable to attend, so they'll get the recording. We do have a chat feature, which I'll pop into here in a minute. We'd love to hear from you, and we have a Q&A feature, and we welcome you to use that. I assure you that our panelists, while they've got perspectives to share, they really want to hear your questions. So if you want to know very real, specifically from a jail perspective, from an EMS perspective, from a law enforcement perspective, if you want to know what it's like to do this across systems, please drop your question in. Be real, be honest. They would like to hear those questions, and they probably would like to do that more than me putting them on the spot to share their perspective. So do them a favor and fill up that Q&A box. But I want to get back to, I asked Cisse to do a quick overview of ABLE active bystandership, but I'd love, Cisse, if I could give you just a little bit of time and space to share a little bit of the history of ABLE, and then you and I can kind of share that history of ABLE and HEROES collaboration.
Yeah, of course. So happy to answer that. So, as some of you may already know, Able started back in 2020 following the tragic killing of George Floyd. And to many people, this national tragedy, to many people, this was a national tragedy. And in that same regard, a lot of people were upset about the outcome. And from this event, there were a lot of questions being raised. For example, some people were questioning why did the officer use that much force? And people were questioning why didn't he stop? And while this conversation was being taken place, other questions were being asked, right? So why didn't anyone around him stop him? So this brought up this longer conversation regarding intervention. What is intervention? And how do we recognize the responsibility we share to step in when something doesn't seem right? And, at this time, there wasn't any national curriculum being taught to law enforcement about active bystandership. There was a program called EPIC, which was currently being facilitated in New Orleans. And so this program was teaching active bystandership to officers at the New Orleans Police Department. But we saw that we wanted to bring those teachings on a national scale. So through those teachings of that curriculum, in collaboration with Shepherd Mullen, the law firm, along with law enforcement leaders, community advocates, and academics, ABLE was created to provide this new curriculum to law enforcement personnel across the nation. So at its core, the purpose of ABLE was to help law enforcement agencies build this culture of intervention where they feel empowered and where they feel supported to intervene. And I talked a little bit about this earlier in regards to our three pillars. So to reduce mistakes, to prevent misconduct, and promote officer health and wellness. But even taking it a bit further from that, ABLE has always been a program that was about, or that is about reducing harm, whether to a civilian or to your colleague. So it's about creating organizational culture where people feel empowered and supported to speak up when something doesn't seem right to mitigate harm on all fronts. So as this program has grown, one thing that has become increasingly clear, especially with our collaboration with Heroes, law enforcement officers, they rarely respond to incidents alone. So this can extend to when an officer is paired with a partner to respond to a call, or it can even extend to responding to a call where another agency is present. So, and sometimes when responding, these agencies, they're not always law enforcement that are on scene. It can be a different profession within the public safety space, right? So what's clear is that many of today's calls involve multiple public safety professionals working side by side with one another. And so this extends to all other officers on a local and or federal level. It extends to EMS, firefighters, crisis clinicians, and other public safety partners. And while each profession in itself has its own responsibilities, we believe that we believe that all of them, they share this common mission, right? And that mission is protecting the public, reducing harm, and keeping one another safe. And so that's why I believe our work with cross-disciplinary active bystandership, it's the next evolution in our phase. Because when we're teaching intervention, as, if we're teaching intervention, it should be modeled as this professional responsibility. And that responsibility shouldn't be restricted to the boundaries of any single institution, right? It shouldn't just be for one institution, one profession, one agency. It should extend to everyone working together during an incident or a joint operation. And this is something we also teach in our ABLE curriculum. And, our national instructors, you're all here, so you definitely know this. In our 8-hour core curriculum, we always highlight that intervention isn't something that should be limited to police. It applies to, most, if not all professions, right? From aviation to healthcare, the medical space, same thing. So we definitely see this as a staple for our curriculum already, and it speaks to the cross-disciplinary nature of the work that we're doing here currently with Able and Heroes. Mhm.
Thank you, Cece.
Yeah, of
Yeah, and I
course.
think some of just a quick bridge to that, and then I want to jump right into here from Suffield. When Able made the decision to stay really specific to patrol-based law enforcement, that's their wheelhouse, that's their specialty, that's their expertise. Some of us who have been working with Heroes for some time, I see we have Joel DeVoskin as one of our attendees. Hey, Joel, shout out, glad to have you here today. So, Joel, and many of you know Karen Collins Rice and myself started up Heroes, which is really that bridge of bringing the active bystandership training to the rest of public safety. And so Heroes provides the same training for corrections, detention, EMS, dispatch, fire and rescue, as well as city governments. And so, one of the things that we found very early on is that we know that communities work together, practice together, and train together. And so CSA and I started collaborating about how do we bring our training to agencies so they don't feel like they have to do both, so they don't feel like it's an overlap. How do we collaborate together? And so we did some innovating as far as how to cross train, but how to make sure people get their specialty practices. And we're really excited to highlight that work here today. So I'm going to head over to my folks from Suffield. Captain Palmer, I'm going to start with you first, and then I'd like to hear from Chris. And kind of for both of you, my question is, what was valuable about active bystandership training? But in addition, why cross training in your community as well? Thank you for joining.
Oh, you're welcome. I appreciate the opportunity to speak on this. So, here at Suffield PD, we're a smaller agency. We currently have 21 officers, but we've got 30 personnel in terms of support staff, dispatchers, and whatnot. When we saw the opportunity to bring ABLE into our organization, we recognized a number of values beyond reduction of mistakes, prevent misconduct, and promote health and wellness. One of the things we really liked was it gave concrete skills to our people in an effort to mitigate those risks and aid ourselves in trying to keep track of each other. So one of the things we have in Connecticut that may be unique to other listeners is we have a statutory obligation to intervene in situations in which law enforcement members are engaged with the public and we think things are going wrong. So part of that is, hey, it's great to talk about intervention, but what do we do? How do we go about giving our people a solid skill set that uses common language and is something that we can revisit repeatedly to kind of make it clear about what the expectations are and how to go about having those challenging conversations in the moment or after the moment, depending on the nature of what happened. And then if you layer in the aspect of between Chris at the ambulance service and the members of the fire department that were involved, as a small town with smaller agencies, we're always working together. We're constantly with each other. We may beat EMS to a scene, but they're very shortly after we are. In the fire department and all three of our services, we work very closely together. That commonality of intention was going to be important, and it gives us the ability to talk to each other effectively in moments where we think things aren't going the way they should.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And one of the things you mentioned is about a policy. And I really appreciate the reminder that that policy comes to life when you attach both training and culture. And that's certainly, my experience with Suffield PD, and I'm sure CSA felt the same. Very professional organization, really no question. They already had an agreement, AKA their policy, that people should intervene on each other when they see harm. But I think that the message that the chief and the captain sent to the department is that this isn't just something that's on paper, but it's something that it's real and expected, and let's get the tools to do so. I do also want to comment before I pitch over to Chris is that the police department, it was actually their idea to make sure that we included dispatch. So they also brought members of their dispatch into the training, which I think was also incredibly valuable, again, for that full perspective. And so we actually hosted the training at the volunteer ambulance department. And it was in the middle of winter, which seems like eons ago. I just remember because there was a blizzard and I got snowed in for an extra day or two. Great place to get snowed in. Hey, I'll tell you what, people in Suffield are really nice. That both the EMS fire department and especially Captain Palmer took really good care of us while we were there. So we are still grateful for that. Chris, how about you from the volunteer ambulance perspective or just your perspective doing a lot of trainings, the why of active bystandership as well as why to cross train with your local public safety professional?
I think Captain Palmer kind of hit a lot of it on the nail on the head with the whole smaller agency. Almost every, I feel, incident here has the three of us or at least two of us on scene for everything. And, the big message of just because it's a different uniform, a different policy, a different, set of protocols, like every agency needs that common language of being able to speak up. I personally, growing up as a little EMT and working my way through the pre-hospital care, I witnessed a lot of situations where it would have been a great spot for this training to have those tools, maybe not for me, but for somebody else. And I said this during the training too, like EMS is this I'm sure everybody can relate, but we tend to eat our young early. We tend to, silence the early voices, and that was something when I grew up in this, and I don't want to see. And my biggest goal bringing the training here, because I went to the small thing in Pinnacle, that's kind of what brought it back here to town. Was I wanted to have my folks here at my ambulance building look at a schedule and not pick a different day because who was on it, right? And then it kind of just blew up into what it was, which I appreciate everybody in town for that, Chief Spencer, everybody, because I never would have thought it turned into what it did. So,
I'm so glad you mentioned that because that was probably one of the things that I know Greg Hanna and I really latched on when you said this, which is I want people's day not to be determined by who they got paired with that day or their shift, you said. I think it was their shift. And I think
yep.
that's really getting at the heart of the culture shift that we're active in active bystandership. Like you all already have really tough jobs, right? They're not easy jobs. Yeah, there's some easy days and there's hard days, but at the end of the day, right, it's already tough work. There's a lot of public scrutiny, public expectation. And so the last thing you need to do is feel like you don't have each other's backs. And if I'm right, Chris, like one of the things we unpacked when we were all together is this doesn't mean you have to become besties with everybody
Right.
in the department, right? You just need to figure out how to work through conflict and work through differences in a way that everybody goes home safely.
And I
Did I
and I
catch
think
that right?
I think yeah, and I think one of the biggest things too that we learned as an organization was it's not necessarily just giving them the skills. It's creating that psychologically safe environment where people feel comfortable speaking up, because I think that actually has a larger impact. The culture around you can really make or break this training as well. So I think that cross training is very important because it creates that culture throughout your community. So no matter what organization is on scene, we're all part of that culture. We're not fighting somebody else's culture. That makes any sense.
It does make sense. I was thinking about for those of you that aren't kind of a little bit more detail, if you'd like more info, please contact me and let me know. But when we at Suffield, specifically what we ended up doing, CC and I did a lot of brainstorming with people in advance, is that we individually prepped law enforcement, fire department, and EMS, right? We've got their leaders, this is what to expect, got that prep done. But on day one, we brought everybody together in one big room, police, fire department, and EMS. And we kicked off and we really set the tone for that culture shift. And then what we did is then we broke out into two groups, the police and then fire and EMS cross trained for the rest of the day together in those curriculums. And what that allowed is some cultural competency, right? So for some law enforcement specific examples, and then for some fire and EMS examples. But I'm thinking, Chris, about at the end of those days, right? Our training always includes skill practice because it's not enough to have a policy. It's not enough to have permission. You also need the skills. And so we did role playing at the end. And I actually still to this day can't stop chuckling when I think about how real it was watching the fire department and the EMS department role play together on some of these scenarios. So I think one of those things that I appreciated is people had real conversations. We had some levity and fun. And what that did, Chris, to your point, is it created that psychological safety where people could say, you know what? Here's this thing that we're not talking about in our department, but it's bringing us down. Like this is bringing us down because we don't trust each other. Really appreciate that. Yeah, folks in Suffield were fantastic. Want to come back to get some perspectives, but I actually want to pitch over to my friend Michael. One of the other expansions that I felt like Cece and I were like behind in a lab collaborating on was with Colorado Sheriff's Offices. And this is a personal passion for me as a board certified police and public safety psychologist. I cut my teeth working in sheriff's offices. So I really started my career with that perspective that if you're a sheriff, you're a sheriff, you're a sheriff, and it doesn't matter which division or department you're working in, you represent one agency. And that really fueled my perspective about how sheriff's offices really support the from a landscape perspective, the majority of our country. And so I want to hand it over to Michael, who has been working in sheriff's offices his entire career. He also does a lot of great leadership work with law enforcement, but he also was side by side when we rolled out sharing heroes and ables with Colorado sheriffs. Michael, can I hand it over to you?
Yeah, good morning, and I guess it's good afternoon, depending upon where you're at in this great nation. Yeah, what an opportunity to be able to pilot a program within Colorado, specifically with the sheriff's offices. One of the missing pieces that we had, and Abigail said it so well, we kind of consider in most agencies in Colorado, most sheriff's agencies in Colorado, that a deputy is a deputy is a deputy. And what that means is you may start your career, you may start your job in the jail, and you may be there for a year or two working in corrections, and then you're going to go to the patrol division, and you're going to work in the patrol division, and then you might go to investigations, and then you're going to get promoted to sergeant, and you're going to go right back, and you may be supervising in the jail. And one of the missing links to all of this was making sure that the entire organization, I've worked in organizations that were, I would say, medium to larger size sheriff's offices, usually 500 to 600 employees in both of those agencies. And with this active bystandership, it is so critically important that everybody from the top to the bottom hears that message and creates that, and we've talked a lot about it already, creates that culture so that everybody's speaking the same language, everybody knows what the expectations are, and everybody kind of knows what we're going to accept and what we're not going to accept. There's no room then for that ambiguity in all of that. And Captain Palmer, I just love the fact that, you know, you made that comment, one, that there's this duty to intervene, right? And it's the same in Colorado as it is in a lot of different organizations. And what we find is there's a law and there's a policy, but there's no training that goes along with how do we actually do that. And those of us that have been instructing in this, and those of us that have gone through it, come to realize pretty quickly, and that's what I love about the training, that it's not that we're bad people. It's not that we don't want to intervene. It really boils down to, how do I do that? And how do I do that appropriately? And what is going to be accepted in my culture and in my profession? And so being able to bring able together with heroes in Colorado gave an opportunity for sheriffs across Colorado to train in one or the other, but then have that cross where we just have a 2-hour transition from either heroes to able or able to heroes, so that you understand the culture that you're specifically working in, but the overall concept and the reasons why and how to intervene, they're interchangeable. They're interchangeable with EMS. They're interchangeable with fire. And Christopher, you made the comment that when you're making that schedule, and I think about the culture in law enforcement, and we do what we call shift bid at the beginning of every year. And it's amazing to me that people don't necessarily bid the shift that would be the best for them and for their family. They bid the shift based upon who's supervising that shift and what kind of culture that supervisor sets. So when you start to talk about changing a culture within an entire organization, it's so important that everybody from the top to the bottom is involved in that culture expectation and how it is that we're going to get there. So It was great to be able to bring that to the Colorado sheriffs, and I just hope that we continue with that momentum. And I love the fact that we are moving this not just outside of law enforcement and corrections, but we're moving this into city government, into county government. It's kind of exciting to listen now to some of those risk managers that are getting on board in cities and in counties and saying, "Oh, I see where there's a real need for this, not just in our profession, but in other professions and in other city and county governments."
Yeah, thanks, Michael. And we do have a couple of write-ups about our the pilot and the ongoing work with Colorado Sheriff's Office. If any of you would like more information about that, please let us know. Happy to send it over to you. I put in the chat, the County Sheriffs of Colorado did an article on us in the fall of 2025, and we have another one from Heroes specifically. Actually, Michael and I got to talk about this at the National Sheriff's Association in June in Omaha, which seems like an eternity ago. And they are also going to be publishing an article about our work coming out in the winter National Sheriff's Association magazine. So keep an eye out for that as well. And one of the things I do want to mention, I'm looking at some of our attendees. I know we've got some folks from California. California is one of those states where a lot of the sheriff's offices only do detention. For those of you who don't know, that sheriff's offices across the United States are legally obligated to provide detention for their community, of whatever that looks like. Many of them, and most states, that also includes potentially patrol, sometimes dispatch. I actually started my career at my very first practicum was at Broward County Sheriff's Office in Fort Lauderdale, Florida. And the year that I started, they already had patrol and jail and courts and dispatch. And the year that I started, they added in fire and rescue. So it was quite the year to be working EAP in that sheriff's offices. So it really can diversify. And that's why it's important to us that we offer cross training and collaboration. And to Michael's point, we make it easy to transition between the two, but they are culturally different. We do not give fire and rescue the same training that we give police. We do not give police the same training that we give to jail and corrections. That would be ill-advised, right? People learn best, not only, as Chris said, when they're in psychologically safe environments, but also when they can directly apply it to their work. So I think that's really important, and I appreciate that reminder. I want to move over to Greg Hanna. So as I stated, Greg really brings a perspective. He's both an ABLE national instructor, a HEROES national instructor. He was with us in Suffield when we cross-trained EMS, fire and rescue, as well as the police department and dispatch. He's certainly been with us for most of our jail and corrections rollouts. He also joined me this year with the Oregon Youth Authority, which is the state youth detention and correctional facility for the state of Oregon. And so I think probably more than any national instructor, he's got this experience of seeing us apply active bystandership truly across the whole continuum of public safety and criminal justice. So I want to pitch to him a question around what are those lessons learned, right? When we're working across different operational roles, cultures, command structures, like what are some of the lessons that you've gathered? Craig, would love to hear from you.
Yeah, sure. Thanks a lot, Abigail. And it's great to see my fellow friends here, my panelists, and of course the folks up in Suffield. I was just talking and bragging about you all at a Chiefs conference that I was just at in Atlanta this past week. So it's great to see you all here. Listen, that is a phenomenal question, Abigail, because there are so many lessons learned, and I'm going to try to compact it in as short as possible. Because here's the thing. When we talk about ABLE, when we talk about heroes, and we talk about the whole grand scheme of public safety, there's quite a bit that's unique to each discipline of public safety, whether you fire, EMS, law enforcement, corrections, it doesn't matter. There's some things that are unique to those specific areas, but there's a lot of commonality that we have. So here's probably, I would say, the first lesson learned that I've walked away with, and having the opportunity of being able to really just have that family background that I grew up with of various disciplines besides just law enforcement, but then also being able to travel and to work with folks like Oregon and California and in Suffield and in all these different areas of law enforcement. We all have a lot of the common issues. There's one very basic question that I ask in all of my sessions, whether it's a presentation, whether it's a class, and the answer is the same. Oh, and again, a great example. I was just at a conference in Atlanta with fire chiefs, and these are all decision makers. These are battalion chiefs. These are chiefs of fire departments. It was well attended. And here's the question that I asked them. This is a very general question. What are the two things in public safety that we don't like when it comes to culture? And the first thing is don't like change. Well, they said that almost immediately. And then the second thing is you don't like the way things are. Now, when I ask that same question to law enforcement, to EMS, to corrections, they all say the same thing. Everyone says the same thing in that same, no matter what discipline you are in public safety. So what that signals to me in a lesson learned is that every session, no matter which discipline of public safety that you're in, everyone has a lot of the same issues. One of the recent things I've reflected on is, in fire EMS, you all know this, the NIMS framework. That's what we operate in a lot of times in emergency situations. And one of the things that it was nationwide across the country was changing out of speaking in code and code into plain language so that everyone could understand each other, right? So that was an enormous feat and an enormous step. So when you just kind of just think of that one concept alone, the question that becomes is if we can do that on a national level, just how we speak to each other in emergencies, why can't we do this dynamically with how we speak to each other internally and when we all show up at the same scene? So a lot of us share a lot of the common things, although we're unique, we deal with some of the other challenges. Here's one of the other takeaways that I've come away with. Everybody wants to see change, even though they don't necessarily embrace the change at their agency. They don't really feel comfortable with the change, but everybody wants to see it. And they want to see it at different levels. One of the things that we talk about a lot in Heroes and Able when we talk about culture change is to tear down those silos that exist, right? The sworn versus the non-sworn, the civilian versus the folks that are non-civilian. Everyone works together in public safety, and we all have our variations of trauma that we receive. And great example of that, and that's one of the things I loved about what was done up in Suffield, is that they brought the dispatchers in because for law enforcement and really for fire and EMS, those are a lifeline, right? If something happens, they're the only voice that we may hear. And in unfortunate, very unfortunate situations, may be the only last voice that we hear. So when something happens to a public service professional in the field, they're directly impacted by it. And so it's always very important to just really understand that the silos have to be broken. And one of the things that I've learned is everyone wants some type of change, but they also want those silos to be broken. Now, here's something else, another takeaway when it comes to those silos that I've learned and taken away with is that the folks that are at the I'm not going to say micro level, but I'm going to say the front line. So those are the ones that are out of the academy. Those are the ones that are the boots on the ground every single day. When we introduce Able and Heroes at the agencies, they want to know, is there leadership involved in this? How embedded is my leadership? Is my leadership going to be doing the same thing that I'm doing? Or are they going to have kind of just an express thing where we have 8 hours, they have 2 hours? Or are they just giving this to us because we're the problem when on the other side of the coin, they feel like leadership might be the problem? So big lesson learned here is that leaders that adopt an Able and Heroes model have to embody it. They have to embolden it. They have to lead boldly and be right there with them. I always recommend, and I know we do this on a national level as well, Abigail, is that we tell agencies to tear down those silos by putting all rank levels into one session. So if you're going to be training this, have everyone there because that signals the leadership signals that, hey, listen, we're buying into this, we adopted this, and we're going to do this together. Here's one other little quick thing before I pass it back that I've also noticed is that there are also silos that exist even at the supervisory level, right? We look at Able and Heroes as a peer-to-peer model, which it completely is, right? So it doesn't matter whether rank is involved. This is a peer-to-peer type of model and discussion of accountability. Well, the same thing exists even at the leadership level, even at the executives levels. right? They have to have that level of psychological safety because their safety net gets a lot thinner the higher up they go. And they want to be able to have the psychological safety among their own peers. And so one of the things that I so much enjoy about Able and Heroes and how we are able to cross train and integrate is that it really tears down the silos no matter what discipline of public safety you're in. It really just kind of breaks down and changes the culture norms within a specific agency. When the fire department and EMS and law enforcement are all on the scene, which are a majority of the time of their calls for service, everyone has their specific role that they're doing. But something might be wrong. You might look at something and say, "Well, I'm an EMT. That's law enforcement. I'm gonna let them handle it," even though you see that something might be wrong that they're doing. This in turn, like what Suffield is doing, which I was so excited when we did the training up there, was to see that all of those disciplines together were working together, uniform, just like how we did when we changed our national language. That is the way I think we have to operate these days. And I know it's going to take some time to get there, right? But it is a huge lesson learned that the takeaway that we get from it, from the agencies that we train, is that they see those silos coming down and they feel a whole lot more comfortable with being active bystanders to prevent stuff like George Floyd's and all these other headline incidents that have happened out there, and even the ones that we don't hear about, which is the health and wellness piece to public safety professionals.
Thanks, Greg. I think that actually that last piece, and then we have some questions. We have some Q&A from folks. Folks, there is still time to submit questions if you've got some. We're going to pivot to that here in a minute, but we have been talking a lot about how do you reduce mistakes and misconduct, but I think from the very beginning, going back to Chris's first response, we're also talking about how the health and wellness of the department, including the culture. And something we talk a lot about, something that Able and Heroes does very strategically when we start working with organizations, is we ask, "What are your health and wellness resources?" And certainly we are there to help support with a little technical assistance if you need to kind of figure out how do you take what you have and put it into sort of that one pager so you can start handing those out at these sessions. But you've got to have that in play. But here's the thing, when I started out, we were still trying to convince public safety that they needed health and wellness, right? That they needed peer support, that they needed wellness apps, that they should consider to have, canines or EMDR, all the services. We don't have to convince people of that anymore. But you know what we do need to do? We need to convince them to give the tools and the culture to their agency that builds to trust to use them. We just got done training at Overland Park Fire Department, Fire and EMS Department, which is in Kansas, a couple of weeks ago. And the chief of EMS there, her number one why for bringing heroes to our organization, she said quite clearly, "We have an amazing peer support team, and they are underutilized. They are not being utilized to their full extent." And they really wanted to get to some of those inherent trust issues and making it okay. It's equally okay for me to tap CSA and say, "Hey, I think you're about to make a big mistake," as it is for me to tap her and say, "CSA, we've been working together for several years now. You don't seem like yourself. Are you okay? Can I get you connected to some of our agencies' health and wellness resources?" When both of those are safe to say, our agencies will definitely rise. So thank you, Greg, for that reminder. And I do want to give a shout out. Greg mentioned something about the lessons learned about leaders, right? And leaders need to be bought in. Something that we saw in Suffield Police Department, both from the captain and the chief, is that they attended and they were fully present. They gave that, as well as the EMS chief and the fire chief. They were all there and they gave their full endorsement. They weren't just there. I remember, Chris, I don't know if you remember, but the fire chief at the time actively participated in the training, was like asking questions, engaging, was role playing. And this was a helpful but also a surprise. And so something that Greg and I and Michael and I have seen a lot across the country is that when leaders show up and they put that cell phone down and they engage in their present, they are sending a message that is far greater than any policy or memo that they could send out about this. So I actually want to return to Chris because our first question is specific to EMS. So we talked a little bit, Michael and Captain Palmer both talked about that often legal, sometimes a policy, sometimes it's law, sometimes it's state statute to intervene in law enforcement. But I think it's important to ask, what does that look like in EMS? And so Chris, wondering if you can share with us your thoughts around kind of what does that legal, moral, ethical responsibility look like in EMS?
So generally, we have the basic negligence laws as well as, the do no harm for EMS. But we are kind of in a unique position that law enforcement and stuff used to be, but everyone's on body cam these days, and we still aren't. We can, in EMS, we're in the back of an ambulance with a partner. If it's a friend of ours, it's very easy sometimes for us to find ourselves not saying anything, to protect each other, or, maybe we're not comfortable because we're with a senior person and there's nobody there to support us. And if we don't speak up, nobody sees anything, right? So giving people those tools, and saying, giving that statement of sometimes the newest voice in the room is the voice our patient needs, not the one who's actually physically in front of that patient, goes a long way. And I think that EMS is catching up, but we need to do better. And that's why, of course, we did this here, is we need to do better to build that trust and have that relationship with each other, where if I miss something, I want somebody to tell me, hey, this person should actually get this. I don't care if they're day one or year 35. It shouldn't matter, right? Because it's about the patient that's in front of us. And just to kind of partner on what Hannah said, one of the biggest thing with training together, is, we wanted to replace "that's how we do it here," with "what does this situation actually require from us?" Right? Like we were talking about, everyone has their own role, but how do we make those roles work together? Because I think it's better for the public, it's better for our communities, and it's especially better for our patients when we're working together, not against each other.
I really like that. Replacing "that's how we do it here," or kind of "that's how it's always been," with
Right.
"what does the situation need? What does the person need?" I really like that. Thanks, Chris, for sure. And yeah, I mean, one of the things that we often hear from healthcare, or as Michael said, when we're expanding into city government, is more of this moral and ethical expectation around how do we elevate. We know that this duty to intervene. And I want to make one comment, and then I'm actually going to kind of pitch to my law enforcement folks here with one of the questions we have about multi-generational workforce. So be thinking, gentlemen, that's what the question is about. I see Robert is already smiling, so I might just send it right to him. But I want to remind folks that one of the risk factors when we first start learning about active bystandership is that people want to quickly jump into finger pointing and us versus them, right? Heroes and villains. And the science just doesn't pan out that way, right? What the science tells us is that, to use a direct quote from Dr. Irvin Staub, is that heroes are not born, they are made. And so what we know is that people can learn the skills of active bystandership to intervene when they see harm. And if you have not intervened in your past, it doesn't mean that you won't ever, right? We can learn. Thank you so much, Ursula. I love to hear from you. Absolutely, right? So you got to understand that when it comes to active bystandership, there's actually this huge group of all of us, and there's very few people sitting out there on the margins who are quote unquote perfect, or who, are really morally challenged and shouldn't be in the job at all, right? Those are very small percentage points, and active bystandership is about the rest of us. Captain Palmer, one of the questions is about how active bystandership lands in a multi-generational workforce. This is something that we had a brief conversation about when we were in Suffield. I'm curious if you want to share your thoughts.
Yeah, absolutely. This is one of the things that challenges, every organization, from Fortune 500 companies to law enforcement to fire and EMS. The perception that the group of people that were matriculating into our organizations are very different than who we are. And they're absolutely correct. The issue at hand is they are far more fluent in communicating their concerns, their wants, their needs than we ever were. So some of us believe that, hey, we just need to go about our business, do our thing, and don't worry about the pressures and the conflict and the friction. This next generation is looking for places where that's not the case, where they feel like they're being heard and they can speak their mind, tactfully, professionally, appropriately, and get feedback from the organizational leaders. I think the one thing about the law enforcement community, when you're talking about ABLE, or the concept of heroes, is it's far easier for them to do it amongst their peer groups than it is to the higher ranks. So the challenge for us is making it clear that you can approach the captain or the chief, the lieutenant, the sergeants, and have that conversation or intervene in the moment, and it'll be accepted as if it was coming from a peer. So the chief and I, our biggest challenge here, even though we are a smaller agency and it goes across the spectrum, our admins, dispatch, and our officers, is it's okay to have a question about what we're doing. And you can intervene if you think the captain's off the rails. If you follow the steps that you were taught, if you work within that framework, you will find, and that great part about the training was the chief and I played various roles. And it was uncomfortable for some of our officers to have to try to negotiate that learning curve with, oh, it's the captain. The captain, he knows what he's doing. He's been doing this for almost 30 years now. The reality is we played the role in such a way to force them to use that training. So I think from this multi-generational piece is really about, we have to accept that they are clearly different. They have some of the same end goals. They want to serve, they want to do the right thing, they want to be available for the community. ABLE gives us a framework by which they can communicate more effectively with us as leaders.
Appreciate that. Yeah, it's something that Greg and I love to do, which is switch the roles when we do role plays and put the leader as the young, wet behind the ears, needs to intervene, vice versa. So it's a ton of fun, and you and the chief were real troopers about that for sure. I'm going to challenge my panelists if you're up for it and you feel like it, if you want to pop in one takeaway into the chat. And I say that because we're coming up on our close time, but we do still have 2 other questions in the chat. So I want to get to the questions, but if you have a takeaway, you're welcome to share it in the chat, panelists. And for those of you attending, if you've got additional questions and we don't get to them today, feel free to follow up with us. Cece and I would love to make sure we answer any and all questions about ABLE and HEROES. So this is a question that's really for Cisse and I. I'm going to start and then I'm going to pin it over to her. Is that the question was kind of, what kind of outcomes and results are you seeing? And so a while ago, I did pop into the chat 2 resources. I popped in with permission from the chief. I popped in Suffield's pre and post training survey results, which are quite positive, but they show a trend that we see very regularly in HEROES, which is number one, that people, there's really 3 trends. First, that people feel like they gain skills. Second, that they gain confidence, but they have a really strong, what is often referred to as a promoter score, and it's a confidence score in the content itself, and it says that over 95% of them would recommend the training to a colleague. That's a really important measurement to see if people think that it's worth its salt. Would they recommend it to somebody else that's in their role and in their job? I also then attached the article from CSOC that they did in the fall of 2025 on the ABLE and HEROES partnership, if you'd like to learn more. One of the things that I am working on right now is that many of you know Jonathan Aroney. He and I are cooking up an article that hopefully will get published this year that is specific about active bystandership. And one of the things that we're really identifying is that there is actually a fair amount of research showing it's what we call early adoption, right? It's positively received by people who get it. We're getting feedback that people are using the skills and then they're maintaining the skills. What we need to see more of is outcome research and data. And I know that's something that both ABLE and HEROES are committed to start. But I think I always like to end with the fact that something that my mentor and friend Joel Debaskin taught me is that when you know that something is helpful to prevent harm, you don't not do it just because you don't have the research that says that it works. And I think that's a value that we have at HEROES. Cisse, on the ABLE side, what kind of highlights and outcome? You guys are doing a lot of survey data. What kind of highlights do you have?
Yeah, of course. So overall, we are, speaking to the confidence scale, we are seeing a substantial increase in personnel feeling like they would be more likely to intervene in this space. And then we can also see how it varies from, reducing mistakes. If they see someone, in a midst of a mistake, are they more likely to want to intervene? We're seeing that to be really high, especially on the officer health and wellness piece. We are seeing like almost 90% there, that officers are more likely to want to intervene when they see that their colleague is feeling overwhelmed, or if there's some mode of their health and wellness being impacted. So I do think that speaks to, again, going back to this shared responsibility for your brethren, or for your, just for the individuals within your profession. Because although these various public safety professions have different responsibilities, there is this shared common goal in wanting to reduce that harm and wanting to make sure that everyone goes back home safely. And, I think this also touches a little bit on what Greg was saying with the breaking down silos, right? And there is overlap there when we talk about collaborative operations. And it speaks to some of the hesitations that some people may feel when when wanting to intervene in unfamiliar circumstances, right? So, going back to like these barriers to intervention and how they can impact these, joint operations, having different agency policies and trainings can contribute to that. There being different chains of command and just that overall uncertainty on, damaging relationships, who will take the fall or who will take that heat if something goes wrong, right? But then, I think it just goes back to that understanding that there is this shared commonality with everyone. So although each agency may have their different policies, there is that understanding that one, we have that combined duty of intervention, like the duty to intervene when we see something that doesn't seem quite right. But we also have that shared respect for everyone in this public safety space, not only just from law enforcement to law enforcement, but law enforcement to firefighters, law enforcement to EMS and vice versa. So one thing that I like to say when it comes to like interagency in general, it's not about undermining authority, right? It's not about assigning blame. It's mostly just about wanting to make sure everyone comes out of this okay. So yeah, it was nice to see in terms of like the confidence level from what we found that the personnel, from taking the surveys from the pre and the post and even the 3-month follow-up,
Yeah.
there is a gradual increase in people's willingness to want to intervene to make sure that no negative outcomes befall their colleagues.
Which
Mhm.
is so great to see. Thank you, Cisse.
Mhm.
I'm going to wrap up, folks, just by letting you know that one of the final questions was kind of where do you start? And the bottom line is it doesn't matter if you start by contacting ABLE or contacting Heroes. We know how to work together and make sure that every community and each agency gets what they need. If you would like to follow up with any of our panelists, I know that they would be happy to connect with you if you want to let us know. You can probably find most of them on LinkedIn. In fact, all of them I know for sure. But if you want to just connect with them directly about their experience, I know that they would all be happy to do that. Please just let us know. We can get you in touch with them. We want to just say thank you again for attending, and we wish you a healthy and safe rest of your day. Thanks, everybody. Have a great rest of your day.